Welcome back, everybody, to Just the News No Noise. We have said it before in the show. We said this last week, that election integrity is the #1 most underreported subject in America, which is kind of crazy because when you think about it, practically everything in our country is determined by elections and policies that those people we elect ultimately implement. And we've had some ongoing issues with our elections, as everyone who watches the show knows. So joining us to talk about what we are doing today to make our elections safe and secure is Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice, Harmeet Dhillon. Harmeet, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Shutdown, schmutdown, you guys are rolling down the road a number of very, very consequential election integrity cases. Tell us about the top ones.
Well, one of the things that we've been doing in this DOJ is enforcing our federal civil rights laws related to voting, and they include the Help America Vote Act, the National Voter Registration Act, the Voting Rights Act, and some other statutes, including overseas voters and military voters. And we've been asking states to produce the data to us of their voter rolls, and just to be able to make sure that they only have citizens on the rolls and that they don't have duplicates and have people voting in multiple jurisdictions. And so we've had to file 8 lawsuits throughout the United States to enforce our data requests, which are something that they have to comply with under the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1960. Some states have actually reached settlements with us, and North Carolina has agreed to remove over 100,000 voters who were improperly registered from their voter rolls, and we're in negotiations with some other states as well. And so this is an important task and tool that has really been neglected. In fact, when we started to bring these cases, some of the legacy lawyers in the Civil Rights Division told us that they were unfamiliar with how to do these cases. They'd never been done in the Civil Rights Division before. So we're proud to bring back these statutes and enforce them. That's one of the things that we're doing. And then, sometimes we get requests as the Department of Justice in elections from candidates, from campaigns, from sometimes state officials to send monitors into elections to ensure integrity, particularly in areas where there may have been questions about it or a history of non-compliance with our federal voting rights laws. And so this DOJ Civil Rights Division is sending election monitors to Passaic County, New Jersey, and to several counties in California where we've been requested to. This has met with some resistance by some state officials. Governor Newsom has gone nutso criticizing this, but I don't recall ever hearing him object or prior Democrat governors objecting when the Democrat Department of Justice sent election monitors to these jurisdictions. And so turnabout is fair play. We're just responding to requests from folks. I don't know why anybody should be concerned about federal monitors when this is something that's been done in many elections in the past. And so we'll see how this goes.
Yeah. It's amazing what happens when you start to enforce the law against blue states. They don't like it. It's really interesting. Give us an update on Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin, in that letter you sent a couple of months ago, was one of the most important strikes on election integrity. If you're not going to comply, you're going to lose your federal funding. Give us an update on, is Wisconsin complying? Are they in danger of losing their funding? Who else could be in danger of losing their funder with that accountability lens that you're applying?
Well, since this thing is ongoing, I'm not really going to comment on where it's going to go next, but we're very serious about it. You've seen my boss, Pam Bondi, as well, and the president. They're very firm on these issues, and I think that's really the way to go. So what's interesting is how we do so much in our country today is states think that they're entitled to a lot of federal funding, but they actually aren't. You're not entitled to federal funding unless you're complying with federal law. And so they're not used to anybody enforcing this mechanism. And the shutdown has slowed things down a little bit in terms of, we've furloughed most of our staff. We're dealing with some mission critical issues that can't be done after the election. But, rest assured that once everyone comes back, we'll be full steam ahead on all of these issues and making sure that as we approach those midterm elections that we're enforcing these federal laws. And meanwhile, as issues arise and are popping up, we are working with states and local officials, and we're working with governors, and we're holding people accountable to our federal election laws.
Yeah. Harmeet, a lot of people have argued that when it comes to the law, Election Day is Election Day. It's not days, it's not weeks, it's not months, but you still have states persisting where they mail out ballots, even without asking, even without someone requesting some type of absentee ballot. do you anticipate that that can be done away with? What is the Civil Rights Division within the DOJ's responsibility in making that happen? I know Congress has their role to play, but what do you see as the future of that fight?
The primary place where the mechanics of voting are dealt with under the Constitution is state legislatures. And so, we believe in federalism, we respect that. The problem is that in the 2020 and some other elections, actually, it wasn't the state legislatures. They kind of abdicated their role, particularly during COVID. And you saw state Supreme Courts overriding those election laws passed by the state legislatures. That's happened in Pennsylvania, and it's continuing to happen in Pennsylvania, actually. And then you have sometimes state attorneys general or state secretaries of state saying, whoopsie, we have an emergency, so we're just going to make up some rules. So you're seeing states not comply with that federalism themselves. And so, that may be something that can be addressed by the courts ultimately. So right now, you see different litigants, particularly political parties, litigating these issues. You see sometimes the United States Department of Justice will weigh in on it, expressing our viewpoint on it. We expressed our viewpoint on, at a high level in the Voting Rights Act, for example, in the Supreme Court, Louisiana versus Calais. And, that's kind of our role is really at that level as like a national policy issue and interpretation of the Constitution. But most of these laws are made at the state level. Now, Congress could address that issue. That's a policy issue. I don't deal with policy so much in my job, but Congress could address these issues by saying, we grant federal funding, for particular purposes, or we could tie some of the, federal grants or relief that comes under some of these federal voting statutes to certain minimum indicia of accuracy or competency or a certainty. That could be something that Congress could do, and I'm sure people are looking at doing that at some point.
This comes up a lot when I talk out in just everyday public, people saying, well, how do I be sure that I have equal protection of the law when I vote in a state that does get illegal aliens off the ballots or non-citizens off the ballots, but then Californians don't, and they don't check the list. So we just saw the effect of the SAVE database and how much it can do for even a good state like Texas to find non-eligible, non-citizen voters. Is there any consideration that that should become the norm and that not checking that database would create an unequal protection for voters in states that they don't look for illegal aliens or non-citizens on the rolls?
Again, that's kind of a policy issue. I'm a big supporter of checking this data and these databases. We know from what we've seen, that's one of the reasons I'm requesting this data on behalf of the Attorney General is to do the job for the states. The states aren't doing it, and I mean red states and blue states. They're not doing their job to keep the voter rolls clean. That's a fact. You see many anecdotes and instances. I know many that I've examined myself as a private lawyer for campaigns and for the Republican Party when I was in my private role before I joined the Department of Justice, where you see wholesale really using ballots like mailers, like shoppers, like catalogs. Like people just get spammed with them. They get multiple ones. It's difficult to, people assume when they move and they register in a new state or a new county that they're taken off the voter rolls. Not so. Even if you inform the Secretary of State in some states, they don't take you off. You have to go to the county level. And, I've had a couple of people in my family pass away. And one of the first things I did after the funeral was contact my county registrar for the family to make sure that they're removed. It would be a disgrace to their memories to have someone else vote their ballot for them. And so this is something that citizens have to be very proactive about, but secretaries of state, one of the people don't really think about this, but people rarely run for Secretary of State because that's their ultimate goal in life. They're actually usually parking themselves to be a senator, or, governor, or waiting to run for president or what have you. That's certainly the case in my former home state of California. And so there's not a lot of accountability. We citizens need to demand that accountability. We're entitled to that. And so this is among the first administrations that's really focused on this issue. In a Republican administration, I'm proud to be leading that effort. And, the administration is 100% behind us on this.
Harmeet, I'm interested to know what you think about any of these cases that end up at the Supreme Court, because with a 6-3 breakdown on the Supreme Court, with a lot of these cases, they have ruled in favor of the Trump administration and basically in the name of election integrity. Do you anticipate and do you want to see these cases ultimately end up there and maybe sooner so that that can be settled?
Well, we do have the one case before the court right now that's very important. Louisiana versus Calais goes to the important questions regarding equal protection when it comes to drawing lines in states. And that's really about the Supreme Court cleaning up its own confusing jurisprudence in this area that has dealt with, I think, outdated methods of analyzing the requirements under the Voting Rights Act and some outdated criteria under Jingles versus Thornburg. That's an important case that's going to be, I think, maybe possibly determined by this one. But in terms of other cases before the court, I think it's important for the court to really weigh in on issues like election day versus election month versus letting the ballots come in days and even weeks after the fact. There's a lot of loosey-goosey aspects of the law called UOCAVA, which has to do with overseas voters. And what's interesting is the Democratic Party has actually been coaching people in some elections to go, if they're an overseas voter, send their ballots into one of these battleground states and there's nobody on the other side at the registrar's office or the Secretary of State testing whether that person has ties to that state and, whether they're legitimately picking that state to vote in versus some other state. So we really need to crack down on that kind of a thing. And on the other end of that same law, we need to make it very easy for our military voters to be able to vote. And frankly, there have been some military commanders out there in the field who don't facilitate that. So our young men and women in uniform don't give up their right to vote when they go overseas. And so their commanders need to be letting them print the ballots and send them in, download them. I really dealt with that in the Arizona election last year. It was kind of sad to see the number of people who weren't able to vote for dumb reasons. And so these are all things. I want every single American, whatever their political affiliation, to be able to vote if they're an American citizen in a federal election, and only once, and only with other American citizens. It's pretty simple. It's this way around the rest of the world, and yet in America we're having a hard time complying with this one person, one vote concept. And one of the other issues that's very interesting that is going to hopefully eventually be decided by the court is this whole issue of who gets counted in the census and how that gets counted in terms of allocating congressional districts. Because if you have, for example, a California where there are millions of illegal aliens, they're counted in the census. And then on top of that, the Biden administration's census counting actually used AI to smooth out, the way they're calling it, to sort of overestimate, because they were saying, people who are here, maybe they're not legal or maybe they're not citizens. They're afraid to report for the census. So we're just going to boost those numbers and smooth them out. It's kind of shocking. So this is something that needs to be fixed by the courts, I think.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's all so simple. Harmeet Dhillon, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Division, DOJ. Thanks
so much for being here. Thanks for your expertise.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody, very quick break. Back on the other side.